We have two wonderful photographic exhibits that are running right now in conjunction with the Honors Colloquium. The first is on display in the Fine Arts Center at URI. It's on sustainable images in North America. It's called "Is This North America? Is This Not North America?" We urge you to visit it. It's on display until October 28th, I believe. The gallery is open at noon every weekday. We also have an exhibit called Base, which is about Quonset Point. It's in the main library at URI in the gallery. It will be on exhibit through the fall. We urge you to take a look. One last detail. We have a one-day symposium on November 10th about managing Rhode Island's coastal ecosystem. In order to attend, because of limited space, we ask that you register for this symposium. You're able to register online, and the email address is www.ci.uri.edu/project/sustainability. If you didn't get all that, listed in our flyer out front. We're providing lunch for that day and other goodies, so we hope to know about your presence in advance so that we can be prepared. At this time, I'd like to introduce someone who's very special to us, who's helped us organize today's event. He is Norman Rubinstein, who is an environmental scientist with the U.S. EPA Office of Research and Development. He is currently on appointment as a visiting scientist with the Department of Natural Resources Science at URI. Prior to coming to URI, from 1995 to 2000, Norman was director of the EPA's Atlantic Ecology Division in Narragansett, Rhode Island. For 6 years prior to that appointment, Norman was the chief of the Exposure Research Branch, also at the Atlantic Ecology Division. And for a number of years before that, Norman worked as a research aquatic biologist who conducted research in support of EPA's Clean Water Act. Norman is here with us tonight to introduce Eileen Claussen. Thank you, Norman.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's talk. Greenhouse gas emissions and resulting changes in global climate, I believe, are the very heart of our concerns regarding a sustainable world. Concerns that have prompted this very colloquium on a just and sustainable future. Tonight, I have the honor to introduce to you Eileen Claussen, President of the Pew Center on Climate Change, who will share with us her thoughts on a climate change strategy for the future. Eileen Claussen has an extremely distinguished background in national and global environmental affairs. She is the former Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Scientific Affairs, and in that role, she was responsible for developing and implementing policy on behalf of the United States on major international issues, including climate change and ozone depletion. Prior to joining the State Department, Eileen served for 3 years as the Senior Director of Global Affairs at the National Security Council, and in that capacity served as Special Assistant to President Bill Clinton. During the same period, Eileen also served as Chairman of the United Nations Multilateral Montreal Protocol Fund. From 1972 to 1993, Eileen was a colleague of mine at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, where she served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation, and then as Director of Atmospheric Programs for EPA. Eileen received a Master's of Arts degree from the University of Virginia, and a Bachelor's of Arts degree from George Washington University. And she also held a position as the Timothy Atkinson Scholar in Residence at Yale University. It is my distinct honor tonight to introduce to you the Honorable Eileen Claussen.
students here at the University of Rhode Island's Sustainable Communities Initiative for trying to come to terms with a very serious question, and that is, how do we create a just and sustainable future? This, of course, is an extraordinary time, and a just and sustainable future may seem very far away as we ponder the horrific events of 2 weeks past. Usually when I give a speech, I try to begin with some humor, and I do this because I think it's important that we not take ourselves or our specific issues and interests too seriously. But I think the events of September 11th have cast an enormous shadow over all of us, and with it a sadness and a seriousness of purpose that we cannot escape. And so I ask you, for the next short while at least, and for longer if you can, to be thoughtful about the issue of climate change, because it too requires us to be serious and reflective and determined about what we need to do to make the world a safer place. In talking about climate change today, I want to focus first on the science, and more specifically on the ever-solidifying scientific consensus that this is a very serious problem that demands very serious action. I'd like to talk broadly about the challenge we face and the ways in which many in the business community are rising to that challenge. I'll turn then to the essential role of government, both internationally and here in the United States. And finally, I hope to suggest how we might forge a common path forward that is sustainable, just, and fair to all. Our goal must be to facilitate the arrival of a second industrial revolution. And this means doing all we can to accelerate the development of new technologies that will move us closer to a low-carbon world economy. Let's focus first and briefly on the science of climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, is a body created by the United Nations to reach scientific consensus about the magnitude and nature of the climate problem. In its third assessment report approved in January of this year, the IPCC said it now expects the global average surface temperature to rise by between 2.5 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the 21st century. This is a much greater increase than projected just 5 years ago. And even at the low end of the projection, the warming trend is expected to cause significant problems. More sea level rise, droughts and floods, increasingly violent storms, damage to our ecosystem, effects on the availability of water, and impacts on our forests and our agriculture. And the higher end projections of 10 degrees could prove catastrophic. Studies from the IPCC and others also confirm that greenhouse gases produced by human activities, mainly the burning of fossil fuels, are the principal cause of the continuing warming trend. These findings were confirmed in June by a panel of the National Academy of Sciences, put together at the request of President Bush, and including some scientists who had previously expressed skepticism about the nature and pace of global climate change. The NAS report also affirms that temperatures at the Earth's surface already are rising, and that the warming trend has intensified in the last 20 years. What will the impacts of climate change be here in Rhode Island? It's hard to pinpoint impacts on a state-by-state basis, but I think it's fair to say that Rhode Islanders, and indeed all New Englanders, will see temperatures rise along with significant increases in precipitation. Fragile coastal ecosystems could be at risk as global sea levels rise. Barrier reef islands are inundated, and we see an increase in the frequency and severity of storms, as scientists expect we will. Sea level rise could also lead to a flooding of low-lying property, loss of coastal wetlands, erosion of beaches, saltwater contamination of drinking water, and damage to low-lying roads, causeways, and bridges. Agricultural production will surely be affected both here and elsewhere because of warmer temperatures, less soil moisture, and other climate-related problems. And the possibility of health problems, including increases in heat-related illnesses, cannot be discounted. The bottom line is that if we need a reason to act on this issue, the latest science certainly provides one. The fact that there is uncertainty about exactly how much temperatures will rise or what the precise effects will be should be expected. Both the IPCC and the NAS have identified a number of critical research challenges that need to be addressed in the coming years. But increasingly, the science tells us that we would be irresponsible not to take the threat of climate change very seriously. How then do we address this threat? How do we avert the many risks that the scientific community is warning us about? Quite obviously, we must reduce our emissions of the greenhouse gases that are contributing to climate change. And to do that, we must launch a new industrial revolution. This will be a revolution characterized more than anything else by a growing reliance on low carbon and even no carbon energy sources to power the world's continuing economic development and growth. We must embrace the possibility of decarbonizing our economies. At the same time, we also must be realistic about what can be done and in what time frame. Before you start to think of me as a latter-day Pangloss, let me assure you that I am fully aware that all countries will continue to use petroleum and coal for many years to come. The challenge with respect to these traditional fuel sources will be to promote ever-increasing levels of efficiency in their transmission and use, at the same time as we are working to develop and deploy cleaner energy sources for the future. Coal currently accounts for 24% of the United States' total primary energy supply, and a remarkable 57% of China's. Even if these numbers edge downward, as they are already doing with the introduction of increasing numbers of natural gas-fired power plants, the predominance of coal in the worldwide energy mix means that we need to find and embrace cleaner burning ways of using it, and we need to think seriously about sequestering coal-related carbon dioxide emissions. But these steps clearly will not be enough. The bottom line is that we need new technologies to meet the energy and environmental challenges that we face. To effectively address climate change, we need to lower carbon intensity, that is, the amount of carbon we emit per unit of GDP. We need to become more energy efficient so that we use less energy to achieve the same results. We need to promote carbon sequestration so that the carbon we do emit does not enter the atmosphere and affect the climate. And we must find ways to limit emissions of non-CO2 greenhouse gases. This will require fundamentally new technologies as well as dramatic improvements in existing ones. New, less carbon-intensive ways of producing, distributing, and using energy will be essential. The redesign of industrial processes, consumer products, and agricultural technologies and practices will also be critical. These changes need not take place overnight. They can be introduced over decades as we turn over our existing capital stocks and establish new infrastructure. But we must begin making the investments needed to usher in this new industrial revolution, and we must begin making these investments now. Many businesses, in fact, already are taking important steps to address climate change. About half of the 36 companies that are part of the Pew Center's Business Environmental Leadership Council have set specific quantitative targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and others are working toward establishing these objectives. Consider DuPont, a corporation that is well on its way to achieving its goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 65% before 2010 relative to 1990 levels. Or Baxter International, which is committed to improving its energy efficiency by 30% below 1996 levels by 2005. Or IBM, which is committed to having 90 to 100% of its new model computers meet Energy Star criteria for energy efficiency. Other companies, too, are making process and efficiency improvements that are yielding real reductions in emissions. The energy company Enron, for example, reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by controlling leaks in its natural gas pipelines. And TransAlta Corporation improved its energy efficiency by about 4% when it upgraded old, less efficient turbines and other systems. In addition to these types of steps, some companies are investing in dramatic changes to their production processes. Alcoa, for example, is developing a new technology for smelting aluminum that, if successful, will allow the company to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to half their 1990 levels over the next 9 years. We're also beginning to see real movement on this issue from a number of states. On August 28th of this year, the New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers approved a comprehensive climate change action plan at their annual meeting. This plan also includes goals of returning the levels of greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2010, reducing them to 10% below that level by 2020, putting in place a process to review, adjust, and add new goals. The state of New Jersey is hoping to reduce its levels of greenhouse gases by 3.5% from 1990 levels by 2005. The state of Oregon has put in place carbon dioxide standards for new power plants. The state of Massachusetts is regulating its highest emitting power plants and expects to see significant reductions in emissions by 2008. And many others are experimenting and beginning to implement different approaches to addressing the climate change issue. All of these are important developments, and they show how increasing numbers of leading companies and states see a clear interest in reducing their emissions and in helping to shape the energy economy of the future. But voluntary actions undertaken on a largely random basis by some members of the business community or by a small handful of states are not enough. In the United States, we have had voluntary efforts in place for much of the past decade, and still we have seen a dramatic rise in emissions, almost 12% over 1990 levels. In the end, there is little incentive for any company or state to undertake real action unless ultimately all do, and unless all are in some manner held accountable. Markets, of course, will be instrumental in mobilizing the necessary resources and know-how. Market-based strategies such as emissions trading will also help deliver emissions reduction at the lowest possible cost. But markets can move us in the right direction only if they are given the right signals. It is our national government's job to send the right signals. Government can and must play a critical role in establishing the ground rules for the energy economy of the future. Because this is a global problem that must eventually be solved globally, it means sending global signals and establishing mandatory global frameworks for action, because each country must be assured that others will act too. And it means, in turn, the adoption of mandatory programs on a country-by-country basis. What truly matters, of course, is what individual countries and individual businesses do to reduce their individual contributions to the problem. And there is no substitute for actually requiring countries and businesses to reduce emissions, because it is in the process of trying to meet clear objectives